Hey guys, Yeneth here. I just wanted to do sort of a quick video on a couple of different topics, really. Inspiration being sort of the primary one, and sort of related to that, things like interacting with media and stuff. As a disclaimer, my cats are both here with me right now. There's one actually just off the screen right there, and one behind me on the blinds. So if you see the blinds move, oh, there she is. She pokes her head out. That's her. And there's not much I can do about that. The other one is just kind of over here. So if they sort of walk into view, that's that. Anyway, let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about, like I said, is sort of inspiration, is what that actually means, because a lot of us, we have this sort of preconceived notion of what inspiration is, but I feel personally that that's a very narrow interpretation of it. And what do I mean by that? Well, so we all know of interpretation, or almost all of us will know of interpretation as the way that it's usually talked about, which is like this muse, this lightning bolt that strikes in the middle of the night, and it's like 3:30 or 4 in the morning, and sentences and scenes are just coming into your head, and you're just like writing them down, desperately trying to get everything going, and then you can't sleep, so you just stay up and you write as much as you can, or you draw as much as you can, or whatever it is that your particular artistic endeavor, or whatever that inspiration that struck represents to you. And that's the sort of more commonly talked about form of inspiration, and it's one that I think most people actually have experienced at one time or another, whatever that inspiration is for. I know I've certainly had that happen. I've had inspiration strike and just like stayed up for 2 nights and just like done stuff, right? But that's not the only type of inspiration in my experience. So, for example, you'll have an author talk about, the work from this other novelist inspired me. You get that a lot with people, again, like I mentioned in the other video, like Tolkien, or more recently people like George R.R. Martin, or even things like Star Wars. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh yeah, no, this particular thing, this particular story, or these particular characters, they inspired me when I was creating my story, or I was writing a novel, or I was doing some art or whatnot. And what does that mean exactly? Because we when we see interviews with authors or talking about these people, they just talk about having been inspired by these things, but they don't actually talk about what it means. Now, obviously everybody is different and everybody will interact with these things differently, but at least in my case, what this inspiration means is actually pretty simple. It's just a way to approach things. So when you read through something like you watch something like Star Wars, or you read through something like Game of Thrones, right? There is Luna. Hello, Luna. Say hello to everybody on the internet. Hello, baby. Yes. So when you do that, there she goes. Business as usual in my house. When this kind of thing happens, when we talk about stuff like this, and we read through these things, what happens to me is they give me ideas of how to approach certain situations. So, for example, let's say I'm writing a scene, or I'm drawing a spaceship or something, for example, or doing the interior design for some visual aspect of something. And I'm having issues with coming up with ideas for how the scene can continue. I'm stuck on this particular little point. Maybe I'm not quite certain how I'm going to resolve a specific part of the scene. Well, then what inspiration means in that case is just helping you move past that blockage. Now, it doesn't need to be even a sort of major inspiration. It doesn't have to be like, oh, it inspired my entire story. But it just sort of helps you move past little things. You can use these ideas that you encounter through other media. I have to stop my cat from drinking my coffee. Pardon me. What interacting with these types of media does is sort of give us more tools, more different ways that we can do things. So just sort of to kind of circle back to that whole inspiration thing that I was talking about at the beginning. There's lots of different things that can inspire us, whether it's the kind of big grand type of inspiration where we draw a whole lot of elements from that particular thing into our story or our art or whatever it is. But it can also be smaller aspects, and these small aspects are very important as well, because the grand ones, they might sort of define the overall aspect of what's going on, but it's the little details that really help nail down what your actual intent is in these cases, or what it is that you actually mean. And this is, in some cases, it can be more important even than the larger pieces of inspiration, because while the larger pieces of inspiration decide the direction of things, it's the smaller bits that give you sort of the nitty-gritty that most people are interested in, right? These sort of smaller elements of detail. So I'm just going to sort of give you an example of one of the stories that I wrote, and something like that. So I'll just do Leviathans again, just because I was writing yesterday, so I've just been thinking about it. Leviathans was originally conceived as less of an adventure story, which is to say less of sort of going through things and finding new places and new regions and interacting with this new and exciting world. It was less that, and it was more about solving a problem. It was a quest initially. Now, that ended up not quite fitting. The first draft of Leviathans was actually a little unclear in a lot of ways. There were some clashing elements that just didn't quite fit together. And I wasn't entirely certain how I was going to sort of mesh the parts that I wanted, because I did want it to be this grand exploration, but I also wanted it to have a purpose. And what actually really helped me resolve that was a video game. So the video game in question is specifically a game called Etrian Odyssey 4. And it's about a group of adventurers that get on an airship and go explore at the behest of the leader of the city that they're a part of. And if you've read any of Leviathans and that sounds somewhat familiar, that's because it is. It helped me frame a lot of, not necessarily the core story of Leviathans, but a lot of these surrounding elements that helped me figure out how to take that core story of Leviathans and drive it forward, which is very important, because without that, I would have just been stuck for a very long time trying to figure out how these things are going to work together. And instead, by interacting with this game, by playing this game, I sort of very quickly slotted into place for me. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind, is that as an author, as someone who does creative endeavors of any kind, whether they're writing or they're some kind of more physical art, or they're the plastic arts, or even something like designing a new piece in some kind of robot or something like that. We really need to realize, and something that I think that isn't realized enough, is this idea that the media that we interact with, the things that we read, the things that we play, the things that we listen to, they inform a lot of how it is that we're going to consider solving certain problems in our own work. And what I mean by that is like this. If I'm writing a book, let's say I'm writing a science fiction novel, for example, and I'm having writer's block, I'm having trouble resolving a specific scene, I'm having trouble figuring out what comes next, maybe even sort of the way that the characters are fitting together isn't working, or the story isn't playing out the way that I want it to. Well, there's the sort of traditional advice, which is just write whatever. Is write 3, 4, 5, 6 more, however many pages of just whatever comes to your mind. And that's valid, right? It's a way to sort of cycle through ideas. And the thought process there, at least my interpretation of it, is that eventually you'll land on something that works. Eventually you'll sort of have thought enough about what it is that you're doing that you'll come up with a way to push past the problem. Now, this works, but it's a lot slower than I think most people realize, and it's honestly kind of a pain. I really, really, really hate doing it. It's so frustrating to sit there in front of this page and be like, oh, okay, cool. So I need to get through writer's block, which means, oh, I guess this project I'm working on, I'm going to have to put it aside for however long and just write this now. And this is what I'm doing for the next however many days. It sucks. It's awful. But you know what isn't awful is what I do instead a lot of the time, which is, oh, I'm writing a sci-fi story. I'm going to go binge watch a bunch of sci-fi TV shows. And you'd be surprised how much that helps. Because when in this case, for example, again, just to sort of stay on track here, sorry for my rambling. If I'm writing science fiction and I interact with science fiction, I engage with science fiction media, the ways that those other authors, the way that those other writers, the way that those other people have resolved the problems that they've encountered in their story comes through in the stories themselves. So a lot of the time we'll put our characters, or we'll place our story in such a place, in such a way, we'll position them in such a fashion that it's difficult for us to imagine how it would move on. But that's not a unique scenario. And what I mean by that is, despite you thinking of a very unique setting or an incredibly unique flow for your story, any given scene has probably been not necessarily done before, but approached, right? So by interacting with different media, by binge watching a science fiction series, or reading another science fiction novel, or playing science fiction video games, the story elements that are used in those pieces of media can help you put together the puzzle to continue on your own story. This is the other cat here that you just saw, that Shadow. She's the more annoying one, although Luna's the more destructive one. The Luna's a kitten, so. But yeah, so like that's just sort of it, I guess. It's these by our downtime as looks like Luna has been bothering Shadow, and Shadow didn't want anything to do with it. But so the things that we're writing, we tend to get stuck in a way that we want something to happen. At least I do. So I'll be writing something and I want something to go a specific way. But just because I want it to go that way doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way, or even the cleanest way, or the most interesting way. And by using my downtime that I would otherwise be not paying attention to just sort of keep an eye out on these things. I'm not saying that you need to like have a notebook out and write down, okay, so when it's in this situation, I can resolve it like this and I can do that or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that like when you're watching something or reading something or playing something, just sort of pay attention to the story the same way that you would normally, but maybe just a little bit more deeply in how things happen. Because a lot of the time when we're reading or watching, we're letting the story kind of hit us, right? We're not thinking about it. But by thinking about it, not only do I think it becomes more interesting, because you end up being able to have theories and put things together yourself, and it feels really good when you approach what ends up having happened. But you also end up having a much easier time with understanding how stories work in general, And when you have that understanding, when you do that, it's much easier for you to write yourself. So, like, again, it doesn't have to be anything that you would traditionally think of. It doesn't have to be a book. It can be, like I said, a TV show. While I was writing Leviathans, I watched a ton of anime, and I just picked anime that I thought would be not relevant. That's not really quite the right idea, but that I thought would have elements that would be interesting to see in Leviathans, right? And just kind of doing that, right? Now, of course, I do still have, like, sort of, quote, regular downtime where I'm just doing things that have nothing to do with what I'm writing. But even then, if I'm just paying attention to how things fit together, it makes it a lot easier to push my own writing forward. I'll be playing a video game, and something will happen in the video game, and I'll be like, damn, that's a really cool idea. I wonder if I could do something like that. And then it turns out I can, and the story that I am writing ends up much more interesting because of it. So it's just a way to use the things that you're already doing to facilitate the writing or the creative work that you're also doing. And that's kind of what I mean by small inspiration details, or to circle back down to the beginning. That's what I mean by small details of inspiration. It's these little aha, what if I did that, right? Moments that you get sometimes when you're writing, when you're watching a movie or you're reading something and you're super engaged with it and you're paying lots of attention to what's going on, and then you see it and you're like, whoa, I could do that in my book, or I could do that. I could use this particular design in my artwork, or something like that. And I think that that's a piece of inspiration that's not talked about enough. It's not acknowledged enough, because it's a very important type of inspiration. I'd argue it's more important, again, because it's what actually drives the writing forward. So yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to talk about today. So sorry for some of the rambling. I hope the cats made up for it with their, being cute and all that. So yeah, have a nice one, guys. Enjoy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy my content, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the little bell so you know when I release a new video. Leave a comment if you have any questions, and if you want to know more about my writing, there's a link to my websites in the description. Talk to you next time.